From the 22 News Plus studio, this is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of InFocus. I'm your host, Patrick Berry. We are here in the 22 News Plus studios. All right, folks, it's quiz time. What do the cities of Chicopee, Holyoke, Pittsfield, Springfield, and Westfield all have in common? If you haven't gotten it yet, well, my guest today is Hallie Claflin. She is a Gateway Cities reporter from the organization called Commonwealth Beacon, and we are here today to talk about what those 5 cities have in common. They're gateway cities. Hallie, thank you so very much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Patrick.
You spend your time in these cities learning how they operate, so you know full well what a gateway city is, which we will get to in a moment. But for those people who are watching and are unfamiliar with Commonwealth Beacon, what is it?
Yes, Commonwealth Beacon is a nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom. We are based in Boston, but we cover the entire state. And so we have an environmental reporter, we have a Beacon Hill reporter, we have me, a Gateway Cities reporter, and we have a housing and courts reporter. We used to be known as Commonwealth Magazine. We're coming up on our 30th anniversary, but a few years ago, we transitioned to mostly digital and we became Commonwealth Beacon. And we're actually a part of the nonprofit civic organization called MassInc. So MassInc is our publisher, and MassInc does a lot of great policy research and polling here in Massachusetts.
It's funny, the gentleman that I've had on this show, Richard Parr, he is one of the pollsters for MassInc.
Yes.
He's brought to this show some fantastic information on what they've worked on. And I'm excited to have my conversation with you to learn more about gateway cities.
Absolutely.
So let's start off with Hallie, what is a gateway city?
Good question. So gateway cities in Massachusetts, there are 26 of them.
Okay.
So it's a lengthy list. I would try to name
them all.
But there's
351 cities and towns in the Commonwealth.
There are. I'm getting to the point where I think I could name them all, but that's a little bit of pressure. But
we just need the 5 in our neck of the woods.
Yes, in Western Mass. So gateway cities are Massachusetts' former industrial cities.
Okay.
So these are communities that really saw the height of the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, the 1900s. These were huge economic centers for manufacturing, textiles, mills, shipping, all sorts of things, and they were really booming towns. But unfortunately, with the decline in manufacturing, when those jobs left America, so did those people. And so these cities really took a hit. Their populations went way down.
Right.
And so for decades, they've sort of been in this position where they have to work on revitalizing their economies. They have to work on, transforming and reforming themselves and making themselves more attractive places to live, to draw in more people. A lot of folks live in Boston. We know that, to draw more folks in. And so they have, a similar set of challenges. They're all very different in terms of population, where they are in the region in Massachusetts, but they do share a similar set of struggles, transportation access, healthcare access, education, having good quality competitive schools, school conditions, all sorts of things. And so they're similar, but they're different. And it was actually sort of MassInc that coined the term gateway city. People think of them.
Oh, really? It wasn't our legislators? It was MassInc that did it.
It was MassInc. They had done a lot of great research sort of around 2010 to really try to draw in a lot of attention to these cities, because as much as they struggle and as much as they need to revitalize, they have a lot of assets. They're charming cities with lots of brick, and, they're walkable. They have walkable streets. They have museums and universities. Some of them are on waterfronts. They're attractive places to live, and with the right investment, they can really revitalize. But I think for a lot of people, they're seen as sort of a gateway to the middle class or a gateway to the American dream. They're home to a lot of immigrants, a lot of low-income residents, a lot of foreign-born residents. And so, 26 of them.
It's interesting when I listen to your definition of a gateway city and I look at the 5 that are here in Western Mass, as I mentioned earlier, Chicopee, Holyoke, Pittsfield, Springfield, Westfield, that hits the nail on the head. When we think back to each one of these 5 communities, huge manufacturing, 120, 150 years ago. And, I look at Holyoke's a perfect example. Well, they're all perfect examples, but Holyoke's great because everybody knows the Canal District of Holyoke, Lower Main Street, that whole area. Those old buildings are still there,
Mm.
but Holyoke has done an incredible job repurposing them.
Yeah.
Business incubators, restaurants, housing, whatever it might be. So, I think of each of the 5 that are here in Western Mass and the remaining 21 around the state. They're all very similar but different.
Yeah.
In their similarities, are there qualifications, income, median income, population level? Are there qualifications to be labeled a gateway city? Because I think of like Huntington, Massachusetts. It's a hill town. Strathmore Paper was there, big paper mills out along the Westfield River, but Huntington is not a gateway city.
Yes. So something that was really central to what a gateway city is, back in 2007, like I mentioned, when Mass Inc. sort of coined this term and did all this research and kind of drew some attention to these cities, a really, really strict qualifying characteristic of these cities was that they are regional economic anchors. They are regional economic hubs of activity. And so when we think of what that means, like that, if you can have a thriving, booming, bustling city that's in really good shape economically, that sort of trickles out, right, to the surrounding towns and cities and counties and suburbs. And so the idea was that if you can strengthen these economic hubs, you then, create these really strong regional economic centers all around the state, right? You can't just have Boston as like the one economic
Boston
anchor
or
of the state.
Springfield. You have to have more.
Right. You need them all over the state. And so when Mass Inc. didn't set a strict definition, but Mass Inc. actually only selected 11 cities that were gateway cities. Springfield was obviously one of them, Worcester, Fall River, a number of them. But those cities really anchored the regional economies. And I think the idea was to get out of Greater Boston. The idea was to draw attention and investment to cities that were out of the Greater Boston area, because Boston really is the main city that anchors the regional economy. Yeah, in the eastern part of the state. Right. And so when that definition was, that definition is a little less clear, but we understand that they need to be regional hubs of some sort. However, around 2010, the legislature and the state government really took note of these cities and really realized how important it was to invest in them, to invest in economic development, community development, transportation, to really turn these cities around. And so when the legislature took note of them and sort of adopted them, the legislature laid out a definition in state statute, and that definition is a bit more clear. So this was around 2010. Those 3 criteria that a city has to meet to be a gateway city. Number 1 is population. So you have to have a population between 35,000 and 250,000. Second is income. You have to have a median household income that is below the state's average. And then third is educational attainment. So you have to have an educational attainment rate of a bachelor's degree or higher that is, again, below the state's average of educational attainment. So those were the 3 criteria that the legislature sort of set on. And as you can imagine, that encompassed a lot more than just 11 cities. That actually encompassed 24 cities. And then in 2013, Attleboro and Peabody, those 2 cities, their median household incomes dipped below the state average. And so former Governor Patrick, his administration added those 2 cities to the list. So that's the 26 that we have today.
Very good. We are up on our first commercial break. We've got plenty more to talk about when it comes to gateway cities. So stay with us. We're back in just a few minutes.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry. This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Welcome back, everyone, to this edition of In Focus. I'm your host, Patrick Berry. Sitting across the desk from me today in the hot seat is Hallie Claflin. She is with Commonwealth Beacon, and her coverage area is the gateway cities, the 26 towns here in the Commonwealth that are classified as gateway cities, which we covered just a moment ago. But what dawned on me during the break was, you said Governor Deval Patrick added a couple during his tenure as governor. Do communities come and go off the list?
This is a great question and a very timely question. So, yes, it's kind of unclear to actually think about whether or not, lawmakers, when they decided on the three criteria in state statute, in state law, it begs the question if they ever thought about how often cities would actually toggle in and out of those three criteria.
Right.
And to be honest, the criteria were a little bit arbitrary compared to how Mass Inc. had sort of described the cities as regional economic anchors. Certainly, having cities with lower incomes, lower educational attainment. Obviously, the state was very clear in saying we want to invest in those areas, but in terms of actually, like I said, actually being a regional economic anchor, when those three criteria were settled on, that encompassed a lot of other cities, especially ones that are actually pretty close to Boston and out in the eastern part of the state. But yeah, it's interesting because cities actually toggle in and out quite often, is what we've found. So there are actually 3 gateway cities currently that do not meet the 3 criteria in state law. Those cities are Salem, Methuen, and Quincy. Quincy, for example,
but they're considered gateway cities, but they don't meet the three criteria.
They're still considered gateway cities. And I think what I mentioned in 2013 when Governor Patrick added Attleboro and Peabody, that was the last time we've ever really touched the list. The list has remained
13 years ago.
Yes, the list has remained the same ever since then. And like I said, cities like Quincy hasn't actually qualified or technically met those 3 criteria in state law since about 2016. But these cities have continued to receive, it's reasonable to assume millions of dollars over the course of years in special funding.
But I have to imagine, even though they're not technically considered gateway cities, they're benefiting. The region around those cities are benefiting because of the funds the state is funneling their way.
Yes, yeah. So there's gateway cities actually are eligible for a list of special grants and certain types of funding for housing, for transportation developments, for community development, for economic development. And so it's quite a significant amount of money. I mean, it's millions of dollars every year, especially HDIP is a huge state program specifically for gateway cities for market rate housing. And so
what's HDIP?
HDIP is the Housing Development Incentive Program.
Okay.
So it's a program, like I said, specifically for gateway cities that gives tax incentives and tax breaks for market rate housing developers. And so, yeah, so there's 3 that no longer qualify. And interestingly enough, there's actually 2 cities right now that meet the 3 criteria, but they're not a part of the gateway cities list and they're not receiving funding.
Which ones?
Those are Marlboro and Weymouth.
Okay.
Yes.
So now do the town, for each of those communities, Marlboro and Weymouth, do the mayors or town council, however they're run, or even their state legislators, are they fighting to get these towns added to that list? Because it can only help them.
Yes, they are. And, back in 2010, when gateway cities were created, it was kind of common for lawmakers to be really eager to try to get their cities that they represent on the list, because this is access to really great funding that is can really be transformative. And so a lot of lawmakers were eager to try to tweak the criteria, tweak the definition so that it would encompass cities or towns that they represent. They want to tweak the population requirement. And actually, over the years, there have been many attempts to change the criteria, but none of them have really been successful. And so, as I've been looking at this, I've sort of found that actually not a lot of cities were aware of this. I think sometime between now and 2013, oversight of the designations has kind of gotten lost, not just from folks on Beacon Hill, but for Weymouth, for example, I reached out to Senator Patrick O'Connor, who represents Weymouth, and he said, I didn't know Weymouth was a gateway city until you told me. And so not a lot of people, I think, pay attention to this, pay attention to the census data that comes out every 5 years. It's pretty detailed census data. I don't think a lot of people anywhere, and even on Beacon Hill, pay close attention to like how the city's demographics are changing and whether or not they meet the three criteria or not. And some cities kind of toggle in and out. Like I said, Quincy hasn't qualified since 2016, but I think Methuen has kind of gone in and out. Methuen's median household income has just dipped above the state average.
Okay.
So that's technically why it doesn't qualify anymore. And so when I was digging into this a little bit, because what else is the Gateway Cities reporter to do? I have to know more. I actually found that the statute itself is kind of the problem. The statute is so vague and it doesn't really task any government agency or department or office with regularly reviewing the criteria or periodically, checking to see who qualifies and who doesn't. You can reasonably assume that maybe it is the Executive Office of Economic Development who's supposed to be tracking this, because the tax incentive program under which gateway cities are defined in state law is under the authority of the Economic Development Secretary. But when I reached out to the Economic Development Office, they kind of said, the statute doesn't explicitly charge us with keeping track of this. And so
we've got enough work to do. Don't give us more.
Right. And so that left me at least wondering, well, is the governor's administration supposed to do something about this the way that former Governor Patrick did? Is this just, whoever makes the most noise about it, maybe something will change? Does the legislature need to do something about it, pass a new bill? It's kind of unclear. I mean, there's many different ways that they could go with this, but it's really unclear to me right now.
Very good. Well, we are up on our second commercial break. Stay with us. We got plenty more to talk about.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry. This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the 22 News Plus studios. I'm your host, Patrick Berry, and today's In Focus. We have across the desk from me she is a reporter with the Gateway Cities reporter with Commonwealth Beacon, Hallie Claflin. Hallie, thank you for joining me. We're talking Gateway Cities here in the Commonwealth. 351 cities and towns across the state, 26 are classified as gateway cities, which means there are a lot of others that aren't, but there are certain criteria. So when we left it before the commercial break, you talked about who's in charge of this. And they're really, at this point in time, nobody's in charge of the list, the adding and removing of communities from the list. But I have to imagine a lot of communities want to be on that list.
Yes.
But is being a gateway city in your travels and your conversations, is it a bad thing for any community? Like, are any communities out there like, oh, we don't want to be a gateway city? Granted, it's a lot of money, but it puts a stigma on our city, that whether it's immigrants or whatever, they don't want to be on that list.
That's a good question. So yes, I think back in around 2010 when the term was first coined, that was a real concern. A lot of communities kind of pushed back on that designation, and they said, we don't really want this label that kind of insinuates that we are like a struggling, maybe more low-income city. But I think as the legislature started to adopt it, and of course, when the designation started to come with funding, then cities and lawmakers and leaders changed their mind a little bit. Okay, well, if we're going to, get some millions of dollars in housing or transportation funding to help revitalize our city, then I guess we want to be gateway cities.
It's funny, about that same time, 2011, 2012, when I was the owner of the Westfield News Group, it was tossed about that Westfield was a gateway city, and a lot of people were against it because it had that stigma. But fast forwarding now, a decade and more, it's turned out to be a good thing for a lot of these communities. I mentioned Holyoke earlier. Pittsfield's benefited from it. Chicopee, Springfield, all these communities have benefited here in Western Mass. I would love to see the Greenfield Turners Falls area, even though it doesn't meet the population requirement, but that it falls into that. It's a former mill town, former industrial with great architecture. I mean, it's got everything there,
Right.
but it just doesn't meet some of the criteria. But maybe the Greenfield area gets benefits from some other state help.
Right. And when Mass Inc. sort of coined this term, there was a lot of debate about what to call them. I think the term weak market cities was maybe discussed.
Glad that one wasn't used.
Yeah, the term third tier cities. And the decision was really like, we don't want to call them that. We want to call them something that is, points to their assets and something that is hopeful and positive. And so they decided on gateway cities, like I mentioned, because for many people, and especially immigrants that move into these cities, they are a gateway to a better life. They're a gateway to the American dream. They're a gateway to the middle class. And so that's kind of why that specific term was used, was sort of to look at these cities not in a bad way, but in a way that kind of highlights their potential.
What are some of the issues that gateway cities are facing in the year and coming years ahead?
Good question. One thing that I'm really looking at this year, and it's something that I really didn't expect to cover all that much when I started on this beat, but it has actually, I've realized, is a really big issue in all the gateway cities, is healthcare access. These are cities that are really vulnerable to hospital closures, essential service closures, health service closures,
urgent care,
urgent care volume, maternity units closing. So, recently UMass Memorial Health has closed, I think, 2 primary care programs, one in Leominster, one in Worcester. They also shut down a behavioral health program in Fitchburg, I believe. In 2023, Leominster lost its maternity unit.
Right.
And actually, recently in Springfield, Mercy Medical Center temporarily suspended its maternity unit. I don't want to speculate, but I mean, sometimes
That
we
hurts a community.
and we see temporary closures often become permanent closures.
Right,
Holyoke lost a birthing center in recent years. And so especially the kind of north central region of the state has just, in the last 8 years or so, has seen so many essential service closures. And to be honest, the state doesn't have a way to stop those closures. I mean, there's a process to deem them essential, but the state can't really stop it when they decide to close.
It's funny, as I'm thinking about it, closing Holyoke, closing Mercy puts an incredible burden on Bay State Health.
Exactly.
But it just, that hurts. You're right.
Yeah, when you think about it, it's like Springfield, the 3rd largest city in the Commonwealth. There's one place to give birth, and that's Bay State now.
Right.
It's kind of crazy. Yeah.
Kind of frightening. Hallie Claflin, our time is up. I can't thank you enough for coming in and educating me and our viewers about gateway cities. Thank you so very much. Hopefully we'll get you back in this chair during another one of your visits to Western Mass.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You betcha.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.